Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. And today I have the podcast that you have all been waiting for. My guest today is Jake Nomada, the man that needs no introduction. Jake, how's it going, man?
Hey, doing pretty good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm in Portugal. I'm sipping some port wine, and I'm really excited for this.
Nice, man. Nice. I'm in Guadalajara drinking a coffee. It's about noon here, so just chilling.
Excellent. And I wanted to start off the podcast by just mentioning how, well, I think your name has been mentioned in probably half the podcasts we've had so far. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that. No.
And basically, every kind of Latin American traveler, every LatAm influencer basically considers you one of their primary influences. And so I'm talking about Kyle Trouble, Dylan Madden, Eddy Quan, like the list goes on.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising to me because I've basically just been shit posting on Twitter for years and not doing too much in depth information until recently. So that was surprising when you said that because I honestly had no clue.
But I think over time, you've definitely met up with a lot of these guys throughout the years.
Yeah, I think I've met up with. Over the years between forums, blogging, Twitter, Instagram. I've met up with hundreds of people. I think one of the first ones I did, I met up with Kyle Trouble in Barranquilla, Colombia, in like 2015, and I think Kyle back then had like a really good corporate job, and he was doing some blogging and had a pretty decent sizable brand with his blog and email subscribers and stuff like that. So like Kyle was doing way better financially than me at that point. And I'm living in Colombia and Peru and the Dominican Republic on like $1,500 a month. And Kyle obviously is living in California, and like his $1,500 a month wouldn't even cover his rent back then. And
Hmm.
so we ended up like planning a trip to Barranquilla with one of my buddies, Dave. And, Kyle spends a week with us, and, we go to the beach, we do some tourism, we go party. Obviously, some chicks were involved there as well. And like Kyle leaves Colombia, and even though he was not like a Latin American type of dude, he obviously moved to Ukraine after that. He like loved it. He was like, "Man, you guys are really living." And I was like, we're both poor as shit, just in Colombia, chilling,
Hmm.
doing normal things that expats in Colombia do. But he was like, "No, like you don't get it, man. Like this is like the lifestyle like I want to live." Not in Colombia, more so in Eastern Europe. But that was really interesting back then for me to hear that, because like this was a super successful dude in my opinion, and I'm over here like making 15 grand a year, and he's like envious of my lifestyle.
And did you consider Kyle successful because of what he already had going on the blogging perspective, or just in terms of living like a check the box life?
Yeah, I think he had a really good corporate job back then, making well into the six figures, and then he also had his blog that was making significantly more money than I was making from all my online hustling back then. So like, for someone like me back then, where I was super poor and had to have roommates, had to cook meals, things like that. Meeting up with someone like that who was making, I have no clue exactly. I'd assume probably 15 grand, 20 grand a month combined with his corporate job and his online stuff, was like kind of eye opening, that he was like, damn, this is the lifestyle I want to live. And I'm like, man, I'd like to not be broke, So it was kind of like we were both, we were kind of on like opposite ends of the spectrum, but we were both kind of envious of some of the aspects of each other's lifestyle.
Hmm. And I think one of the most important parts about how you met up with all these guys and people is that um, this was happening so early on. We're talking like 2015, 2016, where there was just far less people working online, and to be able to achieve a lifestyle of even making 1,500 online was just really outside of most people's realities.
Yeah, so there was kind of like, I feel like there's a couple waves of like dudes making money online. Like I think dudes really started maybe trying to build online businesses like 2006, 2007, 2008. And those were like the original dudes. Most of those dudes were like super sharp. Um, and, a lot of them ended up in Asia, in Bangkok, Vietnam, Bali. And
Hmm.
so that was kind of like the original wave. And like, if you were like trying to make money online back in the day, you were probably looking at dudes like that, like in 2010, 2011. Like, I think one of the dudes I used to like read all his content was like Sean Ogle. I don't
Hmm.
think anybody even knows that name
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, I know that name because he's like been on the Tropical NBA podcast a bunch of times.
Yeah, and the Tropical NBA podcast and the Dynamite Circle BKK. Like
Hmm.
those are some of like the original dudes. And I think a lot of those dudes started in like 2008, 2009, 2010, whatever. And then like I started trying to make money online in 2013. I started traveling in 2014. And at that point, people thought it was weird as fuck, like to be honest. My parents were like, I quit my corporate job at a corporate job in the States. And I told my parents, yeah, I booked a one-way flight to Panama, and their jaws kind of dropped. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go travel for like 4 or 5 months, and then I'll see what happens, try to make some money online. And my parents, like they're cool, but they were like, all right, but don't ask us for any money. Like, this is stupid. And so, yeah, like that, it was basically like, have fun. This is stupid. Be safe, but like, we're not going to send you any money. Like, what if you get desperate, we'll pay for your flight home, but we're not going to like help you out. I was like, yeah, of course.
Hmm.
Um, and so like back then, and then like my buddies too, they're like, what? Like you had a job, like you're doing okay. Like, why'd you quit? And it was really weird back then to do this type of lifestyle. And you didn't see it talked about much on social media because social media wasn't that big of a deal back then. Blogging was more of a big deal. YouTube was just starting to take off. And it was just really alternative. And I think that really changed. Um, I mean, it started to change probably like 2018, 2019, but obviously like COVID just like completely changed the game with how like remote work,
Hmm.
expats, digital nomads are viewed.
For sure. And we'll come back to that about how, the community has changed over time and things like that. We'll come back to that later in the discussion. But I just wanted to finish kind of capping the discussion about like influences. Dylan Madden as well on this podcast talked about how you were his main influence as well. I think you guys met up in Jamaica.
Yeah, yeah. So like I think it was 2019. I had just had ankle surgery, so I had to be in the States for like 2 or 3 months. And I decided like once I got healthy, I was going to visit like a bunch of countries really quick, like countries that I thought were shitty, and I really didn't want to spend like that much time in. But I kind of want to like check the box. So I decided to fly to Miami, and then from there, within the course of a week, I visited the Bahamas, Haiti, and Jamaica. And Haiti's awesome, by the way. Obviously, now it's like fucking a war zone, but back then, like there were no foreigners there, and it was pretty peaceful. So like it was a pretty cool place to spend a couple days.
Hmm.
Um, but Jamaica, on the flip side, was a shithole. Like it was terrible. And so I get there with Dylan Madden, and we fly in on separate flights. We meet up at the Airbnb. Real cool guy, really like Dylan, and like we go to some beaches, we do a little bit of tourism. I think we were there for like 3 nights, something like that. And after, I'm like, what'd you think? He's like, oh man, I love Jamaica, man. This place is amazing. I'm gonna come back. And I literally had to stop and be like, okay, first off, like I'm glad you enjoyed it. But on the flip side, Jamaica's an absolute shithole. You should go anywhere else because everywhere else is going to be better than Jamaica.
Hmm.
So I found it really funny that like he was super hype about Jamaica when I'm like, I'm just going to like, visit once and never go back. And that was kind of funny to me because we had completely conflicting like views. Like he was like, oh, this place is amazing. Like, and I'm like, yeah, this is one of the worst countries in Latin America. Like I will never come back here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for him it was his first international experience.
Yeah, he popped his cherry with Jamaica, which I guess like, start small and get better. I think he lives in Paraguay now, which is a wonderful place. So, like a million times better than Jamaica in almost every way.
Random question just to embarrass Dylan, but did you guys smoke weed?
Of course.
Any story there?
I mean, no, not really. Like he just bought some fucking like some shit weed from some dude on the street, and we smoked it on the beach right in front of our Airbnb. It was, I mean, it was cool. It was cool. It was like a Jamaica experience, but that was probably the best. Like we ate jerk chicken after we got high, and everybody like talks about how like jerk chicken's like fucking amazing. I'm like, I mean, it's chicken with like some seasoning. Like this is not a culinary delicacy, bro. Um, but it was a good time. It was just Jamaica's like nothing special. The taxi driver tried to talk shit to us a couple times, and we fucked around with one of the taxi drivers a little bit because those tourist taxi drivers in Jamaica just talk so much shit.
hmm Yeah, cool. Probably worth mentioning too that you and I have met up in person in a couple different countries. Don't want to give too much away, but yeah, we've met up in Panama was the first time I think we met, and then in Mexico as well.
Yeah, yeah, we spent some time in both those places. I do wish Panama would kind of get back to where it was, like pre-COVID, because I still think the country has potential. But I was, I mean, it like the weird thing about Panama is like you can meet up with really cool people. Like we were able to meet up. I was able to meet up with some other people because it's kind of like an expat hub. Um, but country just, I mean, it's not been destroyed by COVID, but they definitely were like the most draconian country with regards to COVID, and
hmm
that really kind of like screwed up the vibe there, in my opinion.
I almost forget how we even got in touch because I wasn't even running the My Latin Life Twitter at that point in time.
Um,
So maybe it was through our mutual.
I think it was our mutual friend in Paraguay that set
hmm
that up. That I think you had met in Mexico City, and then I think you were talking to him, and he probably was like, "Oh yeah, Jake's in Panama too. Like you should hit him up." And I think that's
hmm
probably how we ended up
hmm
meeting up.
So probably worth doing just a little bit more talking about Twitter and maybe the influence that that has had, I guess, on your life in terms of like your ability to network and meet all these other LATAM influencers, for lack of a better word, and just sort of like connect with other people doing similar stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm actually like have an article on Draft right now about that. Basically, like how to meet people while traveling that doesn't involve like staying at a hostel and hanging out with hippies. And like I think Twitter above everything else is literally the one of the best ways to like meet up with like-minded people. Because with Twitter, like it's literally like your thoughts, your ideas, your personality, your tone. Like you can pretty much read somebody's tweets for, an hour or so, like scroll through their feed and get a very good idea. Like if you're going to like the person in person, I mean, it's literally like their opinions, their thoughts, everything. And you could just basically tell if you're going to vibe with somebody or not. So it's a fantastic way to meet like-minded people, which I mean, in person, obviously that's like a little bit more difficult because, you know, you don't know how somebody is going to view if you want to talk about something that's a little bit more edgy per se, like you don't know if you can push the buttons or not. But with
hmm
Twitter, like you can tell literally if someone, if they have the same beliefs as you, if they have the same lifestyle as you. So it's been fantastic for meeting up with people. I never really tried to like monetize Twitter. I think I've had the Twitter account I have now since like 2015 or 2016. It was mainly just to like shit post, share some ideas and like use it as a networking tool. And it's fantastic for that. I think it's the best way to meet people.
And your handle used to be Nomadic Hustler. Did that, I guess, get banned, or did you just switch it to Jake Nomada?
Yeah, I just switched it because I don't really do anything with that brand anymore.
hmm
So I just switched it to Jake Nomada.
Fair enough. And yeah, I think it's, no pressure, but I think it's fair to expect that there's probably like hundreds of people that are going to listen to this for whom you were one of their main influences. And it's always funny because it's almost like you'll never know because unless they reach out to you and say like, "Hey, bro, I love you," like you never really gonna know. But I think it's fair to say that you've like touched a lot of people's lives and inspired them to travel.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thought. I never really thought of it that way. I was just like, I mean, when I post shit on Twitter, it's basically just like this is what I think, this is what I believe, and like, if dudes are wanting to travel to Latin America, I'm trying to give them like good advice that they're not gonna find on like mainstream travel sources. And
Hmm.
so like I try to post stuff that like, you're not going to find on Culture Trip or TripAdvisor, or Lonely Planet or like any of that shit, because a lot of that stuff is geared towards like backpackers, or like people that, like some digital nomads like to go to different places every week or two and things like that, and that's not really my style of like living or travel or anything like that. And I know a lot of guys like kind of want an alternative point of view, like they want to travel, but they're not interested in like staying in a hostel or going on group tours or moving to a new place every couple of weeks. And so I try to kind of target that like short-term expat market, where dudes are basically like, I think I'm going to move here for 3 months, or I think I'm going to move here for 6 months, or like I want to go work in Latin America for 6 months. Like what city would be good for that?
Hmm.
And so I try to kind of help dudes that have that mindset, that have already, or either like have a remote job, or are, trying to make money online or making money online, and are looking for like a little bit more long term, authentic style of travel.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess while we're still kind of talking about inspiration and stuff in the beginning part of the podcast, I mean, you've been doing this for about 8 years now. Who and what were some of your early inspirations?
Yeah, back in the day, like 2013, 2014, 2015, like blogging was huge, right? Like people blogged, and then people were on forums. That was really like the only way to find this information. YouTube wasn't like super popular in 2014. I mean, kind of, but like people weren't posting like off the beaten path travel videos from like Venezuela in 2014, right? And
Hmm.
so, and social media was, people were on Facebook. Instagram had like just started. It was kind of popular, but I would say like maybe 10% of what it is now. And Twitter, I mean, there were some people on Twitter, but it wasn't a huge thing. And so when you wanted to like travel, you had to kind of like find blogs that were already traveling, or you had to go to like forums, that like where people were posting trip reports and stuff like that of, oh, I went here, I liked it, people were
Hmm.
friendly, chicks were hot, nightlife was cool, whatever. And so those were a lot of like the people that I would meet up with, would be people on forums like the Roosh V forum, and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where I met up with a lot of the people. um, I mean, I guess that definitely influenced me. I used to read a lot of Mike Cernovich's old blog.
Hmm.
What was it called? Danger and Play. He had really good information. Like he was one of the first dudes to talk about like TRT and HGH and things like that. And then Victor Pride had a really good blog as well. I read a little bit of Roosh
Bold and
Feast.
determined.
Yeah, Bold and Determined. He had some good stuff. Um, who else? Roosh V a little bit. That what was that guy's name that traveled a little bit? Goldman, Mark Zolo. I read a lot of Mark Zolo stuff. The Naughty Nomad.
Hmm.
So those dudes were all kind of like um, the original, I guess, like you know, bloggers that kind of influenced me and kind of helped me like open my eyes to making money online, living abroad, things like that.
So do you almost feel like you're the like second generation after those guys? And maybe there's a third generation now, but you were like that next generation.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I wouldn't say I have a like a brand that's anywhere near the size of those dudes, but like those dudes were pretty like original. Like started an online business in the United States, moved to Thailand, moved to Brazil. Naughty Nomad was traveling to Africa and Southeast Asia. Those dudes were definitely like kind of the originals. Where they really blazed that path, and I think most of those dudes are like 5 to 10 years older than me. So I think a lot of dudes, when they get into their late 20s or early 30s in the Western world, they kind of like start connecting the dots and realizing there might be like a better lifestyle available to them, um, moving forward. if they were to leave the Western world.
Hmm. Um, if you happen to get Cernovich, Roosh, Mark Zolo, Victor Pride, all these guys in a room, like what would you want to ask them?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely want to talk to Naughty Nomad about Africa. Um,
For sure.
his writing about Africa back in the day was crazy. I think he had a story about like having unprotected sex with a chick with HIV. I was like, holy shit, man, that's a little much. But obviously, like he did a pretty cool trip through Africa, I think a few times, and so I'd love to pick his brain about that. Bold and Determined and Roosh V obviously both had I don't know what you want to call it. I wouldn't call it a breakdown, but maybe like an epiphany or something, and completely like changed what they were doing. I think Bold and Determined took his sight down, and um, I think somebody had told me he was living in like northern Paraguay on like a convent or something, like 2 or 3 years ago.
No
So like,
way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, nobody knows where that dude is right now. Like he did the ultimate like get rich and then disappear. So good for him. And then obviously like Cernovich, I think he obviously became like a political commentator. But I really enjoyed like his like lifestyle design posts. So would love to pick his brain about like anti aging and long term health and things like that.
What would you ask Roosh?
I don't know if I'd ask Roosh anything at this point. Mainly out of just respect for his new lifestyle and like what he believes now. Um, he obviously had like a really bad situation with his family, and that completely changed him. So I don't know if I'd want to ask him anything, but like respect to that man. He was definitely a pioneer, and he was doing things in like 2009, 2010 that uh, most people found like absolutely ridiculous. So like respect to him for like basically being a pioneer.
Yeah, and I think there probably were lots of people doing stuff, basically just, traveling Latin America, Eastern Europe and going on dates and this type of thing. But there's something about writing about your experiences that um I mean there's a lot that can be said for it.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides to that coin. Like on one side, there's a lot to be said for it because you can look back and you can read your own shit like from like 5 or 6 years ago that you've completely forgot about, and then you'll like have a laugh, you'll remember the moment, and it'll be super cool. Um, so like that's like a huge benefit. Same thing with like an Instagram page. Like you can look at your photos from like 8 years ago and be like, oh man, I remember that trip. That was incredible. So there's definitely like that benefit. On the flip side, you could also get into that mindset of like, oh, I got to do it for the story. Oh, I got to do it, to create content. And then it starts like kind of negatively infecting your life because you're like, man, I haven't done this, anything interesting for like a month. I got to go do some crazy shit, like, and so I think there's both sides to that coin.
Hmm. So what drives you? Like what motivates you to keep going?
Um, I mean, business is just like the funnest game, in my opinion. Right now, like I'm pretty focused on building three different businesses, and it's just like a game. You wake up and you see how much money you made the day before, and it's kind of like an endorphin rush. And I was a former athlete, played college basketball, and like it's really hard to get. I mean, I think there's three things in life that can like really raise your endorphins, and that's like competition athletically, whether that be like basketball, soccer, football, jiu-jitsu, boxing, whatever. Like all of those things are incredible, like endorphin rush.
Hmm.
Same thing with business. Like you start scaling a business, it starts growing like crazy. That's an incredible endorphin rush. Like you feel like high when that happens. And obviously, like dating is the same thing. Like you find a beautiful girl, you go on a date, whatever, that can give you a similar like endorphin rush. And so from like a motivation standpoint, I think we're all just like animals, and we all, at a certain point, you kind of just like seeking those endorphin highs. And I think business is a game you can play for life. It's a game you can play every day, whether you're sick, whether you're healthy, whether you're in Guadalajara, whether you're in Portugal. You build an online business, and it's just this game, this endorphin rush that you can play every day that you can work on getting better on. And I really enjoy that process. So that's kind of like at this point something I really enjoy that really motivates me.
Hmm. I was trying to dig up some stuff and I found your Medium profile where your only post was like why I don't care about fancy cars, and you were talking about basically like wealth versus experiences. And I'm wondering how your perspective on building wealth versus having cool experiences may have changed over time, because any time that you're, visiting a waterfall or doing some cool adventure, you're not in wealth building mode necessarily. And I'm curious maybe how that's changed over time for you.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't even know I had a median profile, so I'll have to go find that. But yeah, I mean, I come from like the suburbs, right? Boring as hell, houses, everybody has a car, everybody's similar financial backgrounds. Um, and so like I guess money was not like a super motivating factor for me for a while because, where I'm from, everybody, had food on the table, everybody had a house, living with their parents, whatever, things like that. So like money wasn't the number one motivating factor for me for a long time. I was bored as shit in Kansas, and it's just a boring place. And so the main motivation for me was, to go somewhere that was more exciting, that was more interesting, where I could kind of get that endorphin rush from going on adventures, from going on dates, from going to party, things like that. And so that was a way bigger deal for me back then. Was just trying to find somewhere that was interesting. Where I'm from, there are no lakes, there are no mountains, and there are no beaches. So the only things you can do for fun would be to like go to a sports ball game, like go to a football game or a baseball game or a basketball game, or like get drunk. And so I don't really enjoy any of those things. And so it was just not a place that I enjoyed living.
Hmm.
And that was the initial motivating factor, was like going to find like more excitement, a better place to live, a prettier place to live. And so that was kind of the motivation behind that post, is like and I still don't like give a fuck about cars. Like I know some dudes love cars and they think it's like the epitome of success is to have like a six-figure car or something. And I respect that. Like that, I definitely respect it. It's just not me personally. If I was going to spend mid six figures on a vehicle, it would be a yacht. Cause like, a yacht can give you, in my opinion, way more experiences than a car could. You can literally live on a yacht, go from port to port, exploring, like dozens of different places. Um, Whereas with a car, like I don't think anybody's living in their Lamborghini or anything like that. I hope not.
Hmm.
So, that was I think kind of the motivation behind that post. I've obviously become less of like a degenerate, more focused on money, less focused on all of the experiences. Because I mean, I used to just try to make sure I made ends meet every month. And then the rest of the time was spent on experiences, going on adventures, partying, meeting up with chicks. Those were my priorities. And that's definitely changed as I've gotten a little bit older. But I still don't give a fuck about cars.
Fair enough. I don't know how to phrase this, but do you think you were like kind of broker longer than you'd care to admit? Because I think you put out a post saying like I was age 28 in Colombia, I was still broke, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? But you'd been working online for so long at that point.
Yeah. So I was 100%. Um, I guess the only way I could put this is I was like fucking myself poor. Um, yeah. Like, I mean, it is what it is, right?
I
Like
understand. I understand what you're saying, but continue.
yeah, like, I was super focused on dating and mating, and all I cared about was like being able to do that in Latin America and have enough money to do that. And if I could make 1,500 or 2 grand or $2,500 a month, um, that was really all I needed to like live my lifestyle. go on dates to like a little cerveceria, go to like nightclubs that you don't have to buy bottles at, stay in a studio apartment. I could get all that done for 1,500 to 2 grand a month. And so my motivations were more like the experiences versus the money for a while. Um, but then I started kind of realizing the problems with that mindset, because like running month to month produces a lot of stress. And like, I'd be at the end of the month, I'd have $1,000 in my bank account, and I'd have my $500 rent due the next day, and then I'd have like my traveler's insurance due then too. So then like I would be looking at like the start of the month only having like 200 or 300 bucks in my bank account. And so then I'd be like, oh shit, I got to make more money. And after doing that for a while, I had to sit myself down and be like, all right, like we need to put a little more effort, a little more focus into the business, start scaling things, start building things, and a little less money or a little less energy into, the experiences, the dating, the mating, things like that. And so I think it was 2018 or 20, it might have been 2018. Maybe 2019. I deleted Tinder and haven't downloaded it since. And ever since I did that, my income literally like skyrocketed, like went through the fucking roof. Because instead of trying to go on like a new date every day, I'm like actually working,
Mm-hmm.
focused on things that probably matter significantly more than getting my dick wet. So,
Yeah, no, I definitely get it. Okay, I'm only gonna ask one question, sort of about girls and stuff, and then we'll move on. But I'm curious where you learned game from, or who were some of the people that sort of like taught you to be good with women, or were you like really self-taught, or curious kind of what your inspirations and mentors were there.
um, I mean, yeah. So I played college basketball. Majority of my teammates were African American. Um, so I picked up a lot of their habits and a lot of their uh, how they would manage women, and that was kind of the start of that. I had a relationship in college with a pretty hot chick that taught me a lot as well. And then after that, I really just hung out with a lot of like Roosh V forum guys that were travelers, not necessarily like the game, quote unquote, game guys. But they were just like travelers. They were savages. And, we would just go out and party hard and have fun. And I learned a lot of stuff that way from, I think I started traveling when I was just turned 24. And I'd never, in college, um, especially my last 3 years in college, I did really well with chicks. Didn't have an issue there. Got into corporate America and was on OkCupid. Did well there as well. And then once I started traveling, hanging out with those dudes that are like, they were like 5 to 10 years older than me and had a lot of life experience. And like we would just bro out and pick up stuff from those dudes. And it was never something I wanted to study. I thought like I guess a lot of dudes do like lines and study game and stuff like that. It was never something I wanted to study because it seemed inauthentic. And especially in Latin America, like that shit just comes off weird as fuck. Um,
It's true.
you know, it, as long as you're just a normal, cool dude that can like pick up a bill on a date, like you're going to do fine in Latin America, if you can talk.
Right, right, right.
So like all that game stuff I never really gravitated towards. I more gravitated towards like the bro lifestyle of like go to a new city, lift weights in the morning, make a little money on the computer, and then go on a Tinder date or go out at night. And that was more like the lifestyle that a lot of the dudes that I was hanging out were living. Is we weren't trying to like creep around and on the street for like 12 hours a day like a lot of the Europe dudes do. Like that was never appealing to me. It was just more hanging, being cool, getting jacked, like having freedom of time to go on a date at 2
Hmm.
p.m. That type of stuff I think is way more important. And logistics, like the biggest thing I guess if you're talking about game is like have an apartment with a balcony, a bottle of wine at your place, and like bars you can go on dates within like a couple blocks. Like
Hmm.
that's going to do more for you than any pickup line ever, in my opinion. And so it was more just like lifestyle design.
Yeah, and some of these Roosh Reform guys or other LatAm guys, did they have to tell you this, or did you sort of figure it out by yourself? Like, do your dates within a 5 minute walk of your apartment, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was common sense, but a lot of it was just like I would hit up a dude, like a dude would post something on a forum or whatever. He'd be like, "Oh, I'm in Bogota. Let me know if anybody's coming here in the next couple months. I'll be here for 2 or 3 months." And you'd hit the dude up, and he'd be like, "Here, bro, like stay here. This is the best place in the city." And like you just you just take their advice. You stay where they said, and they would be right. Like you would have like bars all over the place, restaurants, cafes. And so then, after I did that a couple times and had like a great experience, I was like, oh, it's so simple. You just have to stay in like the vortex zone of like any city.
Hmm.
And it's going to be way more fun if you're trying to like party and go on dates and stuff. It's not
And
complex, I don't
I
think.
hadn't I hadn't heard the term vortex zone until you mentioned it on Twitter like a week ago. But I know what you're talking about, which is basically just like the most gringoified, walkable, upscale neighborhood in a city where typically there's Starbucks and bars and all the rest of it. Did you coin vortex zone recently, or or
No,
what's up with it?
I think somebody had talked about that like way back about like at a bar, like like you find the place where everybody's walking, and that's like a vortex zone, and then you can be social around there, right?
Hmm.
Um, but the same like theory applies in a city. It's like if you're in an area where you've got all these bars and restaurants and coffee shops and nightclubs within like a 5 minute walk of your apartment, like you don't ever have to leave. And
Hmm.
so, and there's going to be a ton of foot traffic there, and people are going to want to go there. Like if you're talking to a chick and you invite her to like this nice area that she knows, and like that she knows a nice area, like she's more likely to show up. And so I
Hmm.
don't think it's anything complex. It's just about finding those like areas where you can basically walk to everything.
Hmm. So, Jake, the talk about vortex zones leads me into my next question, which is traveling with bros or with a girl versus solo. And do you have a preference between the three? And how would you sort of break down the differences between traveling with bros versus solo versus with a significant other?
Ah, yeah, good question. When I started traveling, I was traveling alone. My first trip in Central America was like 4 or 5 months long, and it was completely alone by myself. I think I had a buddy visit me for like a week, but other than that, it was just me, doing my thing, and that was really fun. It's completely different because you're using apps to go on dates, and then you're going to bars by yourself. Um, it's kind of different, but it definitely like changes your personality a little bit because you have to pretty much talk to everybody if you want to have a conversation, and meet people and make friends. You don't back then like there were not nearly as many people online that you could meet up with, and so you kind of had to meet up with like people who were around. And so I was in Panama, and I would go to like a hostel bar and just talk to everybody. And I'm not like super extroverted, but eventually you want to like talk to people and make friends and like have somebody you can like say, hey, let's go do this hike or let's go here. And so
Hmm.
you basically like you're forced to get out of your shell. So I think traveling like alone has its merits, especially when you're starting out, because you're forced to really like open your mouth and be social. Because eventually you can go on all these dates and you don't feel like lonely, but like you definitely like on a date you're not having the same type of conversations you're going to have with your bros. And so it was it was like kind of like a self development thing where you're going out alone, you're having to meet people, you see another foreigner and you go talk to them because you're just like, well, what is this guy doing here? And
Hmm.
so I remember my first trip in Panama, I made a couple friends. The first, I met this dude at the gym. He was a British guy, a former British naval officer. And he was living in Panama. He was a personal trainer, and he would train like middle-aged, like Panamanian, like upper class moms at their like apartment gyms. And, it's like we just met at the gym. We were both kind of like jacked, started training together, go get some food, go out to eat, met that bro, real good dude. And then I met another dude. He had like a blog about Panama, and I just like hit him on email, like, "Yo, bro, like, you in Panama right now?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, what's up?" And he ended up like inviting me out. I met a bunch of people that way. Same thing in like I was in Nicaragua, and me and this other gringo were like 2 seats away from her on the bus. We just started chopping it up, and then we ended up partying like for like a month straight in Nicaragua. So like it really forces you to like be social when you're alone and try to like talk to people and make friends. I also, when I was traveling alone, I would always go play basketball and stuff. So I'd go to the park and meet a bunch of locals that were playing basketball, and they'd be like, I was in Nicaragua playing basketball with like a bunch of professional basketball players in Nicaragua, like quote unquote professional. They weren't particularly good, but like they'd be like, "What is this gringo doing in Managua right now? He comes here every week, like 3 or 4 times a week." And then ended up like would go out and party with those guys, and was super fun. And so I think traveling alone like has its merits, but I definitely prefer um, like traveling with the bros, because eventually you get to the point where there's no real benefit for you to like travel alone. You've already developed the ability to make friends if you need to, but you have your good friends, your good buddies, and you'd rather hang out with them. You'd rather travel with them. You'd rather go do stuff with them. And so nowadays, most of my buddies that have been traveling like this for over 5 years are very similar in the aspect that like if a couple of bros are in one city, like all the other bros are going to go there because, like they'd rather go somewhere where they have friends that they, have past
Mhm.
experiences with, have memories with, enjoy their company, can go train jujitsu together, can go to the gym together, things like that, versus, going to some random city, nobody, and it's just not as fun. And so the
Right,
prime,
right. Well, there's a difference between knowing people in a city and having like two roommates. That, yeah, there's pros and cons.
yeah, there's definitely pros and cons. I mean, I guess I could think about it this way. Like I went to Mazla in like 2017 or 2018, and I enjoyed it. I was there with a buddy, but then he had to leave. And so I was there by myself for like 2 months. I made a few local friends and it was cool. But then I went back to Mazlan during COVID with my Brazilian buddy. And we had a really good time. And like 2 weeks into when we were there, we planned to stay for like 3 or 4 months. Like four of our other friends showed up because, it was COVID. They were like desperate to find a place that was normal. Mazatlan was super normal during COVID. Bars, restaurant, nightclubs all open, gym open, jiu-jitsu open, beaches. And so we had a bunch of dudes show up there, and it was one of my like best travel experiences because we had like a group of 6 guys that were going to the gym together, going to jiu-jitsu together, going out to eat together, going party together, going deep sea fishing together. And it was one of those things where it's like, if you have that, if you know a lot of people and you have friends, and it makes sense to go where you can put a group together of 3 or 4 guys versus going to some shithole by yourself at this point. Um, and I guess your last part of that question was like traveling with a chick, which I currently do. Um, it's different, obviously. Like you're traveling for different reasons, and so it kind of opens up, I guess, different opportunities to go to like smaller places, like more in nature, more,
Right. Quiet
beach,
beach towns.
yeah, quiet beach towns, little mountain towns. Like it gives you more adventure. I guess it gives you a better opportunity to get out into nature and kind of like enjoy those type of things. Because obviously,
Hmm.
like you go to a beach town and like 5,000 people, you're not going on very many dates, if any. So it's like it might be the most beautiful beach in the world, but if you're there alone, you're probably not going to stay that long. Versus, if you have your girlfriend or chick you're seeing, whatever, you're like, let's go spend a couple weeks or a month in this tiny little beach town. It's super enjoyable. So, I mean, kind of depends on where you're at in life and what you want to do, but I definitely prefer at this point traveling with people.
Have you ever done both where you're like traveling with a girlfriend and bros?
Oh yeah, a lot. Um, I mean, that's fun. It's still a little bit different. Like, you're going on dates with your girl, you're chilling with your girl, maybe going on an adventure with her, but then you're also going to the gym with your bros, you're going to jiu-jitsu with your bros. Your bros are like, oh, we want to go visit this little town and go on a hike. You're going doing that with them. So you kind of get the best of both worlds in that situation. But obviously, like, that's kind of hard to set up, because like your bros are like, oh, we're gonna go to fuck, where are my bros right now? Yeah, Jake, we're gonna go to Maceió, Brazil, for Q1. Like, you want to come? Like, I'm not gonna take me and my girlfriend to Brazil. Like, that's just retarded. So I'm like, no,
Right. Or even staying in a vortex zone with your girl might not be the best idea because it's just too much action when you leave your apartment and stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. Like, you walk out the street and there's eye candy everywhere, and it's like, well, this it is what it is, right? So yeah, when you're traveling with your girl, you sometimes look for like nicer places that are maybe the 5 to 10 to 15 minute walk from like the more vortex zone of the city, because those logistics aren't necessarily as important for you.
Do you ever find that everyone sort of looks to you to like manage the trip and, reserve every Airbnb and figure out the plan every night and you basically just end up being like a babysitter for like 3, 4 bros?
Um, no, I have one friend that I travel with a lot that is an absolute degenerate and like obsessed with nightlife. So I never have to like organize any of that. Like, he'll be like, "Yeah, bro, we got a table and bottles here. Like, come over to my place at 9:30. We'll pregame, and then we'll go." So like, everybody kind of does their own thing, and most of the time we all rent our own apartments. So it's like whoever gets there
Okay, so when
first.
you travel with bros, you still just say like, "Yo, get your own spot."
Usually, yeah, we try to just like get the own, like, best case scenario, like you have your bros in the same building, but you all have separate apartments, in my opinion. Because a lot of my bros I travel with now, they have a lot of like calls to do during the day, or I think it is better if you have your own place if you're like single and dating. And so a lot of times, like, we'll be like, all right, there's like 3 buildings within a 3 block radius. Like, let's all just pick up apartments in one of these 3 buildings, and we'll be here for a couple months. And like, you're gonna you're literally living like 30 seconds away from your bro, or a minute or 2 minutes away from your bro. So it works out pretty well that way. I had some bad experiences with roommates, like getting in fights and stuff. And I was just like, man, I don't really do roommates that much. I mean, on like a short trip, like a week or a weekend, of course, like we can all stay in the same spot. But on a longer, like, we're going to be here for a couple months. Most of my travel buddies prefer to get their own place, just because, like, you don't want to ruin a friendship because you don't like live well together. And there's just so much shit that people get annoyed about when they're living together, that sometimes it doesn't work. On the flip side, like, one of my best trips, like me, um, a bunch of like Twitter dudes, Scotty, Andy, Nate, Danny. We rented like this 6 bedroom penthouse in Medellin, and every bedroom,
6 bedroom.
yeah, like
That's
every bed,
hilarious.
yeah, dude, it was sick. It was 2 stories, and it had a private pool on the top floor just for like our apartment, and it was 6 bedrooms, and every bedroom was like an ensuite and was huge and super private. And so that trip was like really well. I think we spent 3 or 4 weeks there, maybe almost a month. And that trip was fantastic because we eliminated all of the issues that you can have with living with people, where we had 2 maids coming there every day from 9 a.m. until 3 or 4 p.m. So like, we never had to clean up after ourselves, which is a huge issue when you're living with dudes. Like, one dude's super clean, one dude's dirty as fuck. And now you have this problem because the dirty dude doesn't want to clean up after himself. The clean dude doesn't want to clean up after the dirty dude. And so then you get this resentment. Or like, one dude likes to go to bed early, the other dude's a party animal, and like, the bedrooms are like, wall to wall. And so then one
Right.
dude comes home with a chick at 3 a.m. and is loud as fuck, and now the other dude's pissed off. So like those type of issues, if you can eliminate those, then yeah, like living with bros is great. But for the most part, like having your own Airbnb in the same building as your bro works a little bit better.
Yeah, I think you just encapsulated like a lot of the important issues when traveling with people. So that yeah, that definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah, like I
Uh,
I had
yeah.
a I had a place in 2015 or 2016 in Lima, Peru, like right in Miraflores, like literally in the middle of like right between Parque Kennedy and Larcomar. Like it was like a 5-6 minute walk to Larcomar, a 5-6 minute walk to Parque Kennedy, and it was a 3 bedroom place, and we rented it with these couple guys, and like it wasn't one of the guys was like a really good friend of mine. The other dude was just like we needed somebody to fill the room. And so, like, he stayed with us, and we just had problems with that dude every fucking week. Like, he would get pissed when there was a bowl in the sink. He would get pissed when, like we brought a chick home and she was super loud or something. And eventually, me and my buddy were just like, this dude's got to go. Like, I think we had that apartment booked for like 3 months, and I think we basically like just left because we were like, we can't live with this guy. And so after that, like, if you're really close with somebody and you guys vibe well and like you test run living together, I think it works great. But if you don't know somebody that well and it's like just kind of like a acquaintance, like I wouldn't live with somebody like that. Hell no.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. All right, we'll switch it up. So here is one of the big questions for you, big open-ended question, which is why Latin America when you could basically live anywhere in the world that you wanted to with Wi-Fi?
That's a good question. So I guess we're talking about present day. I'll talk about like right now, and then I'll talk about the past where my motivations were. So obviously, like right now, you've got war in Europe. Europe's going to be cold as fuck for the next like 4 to 6 months. And I mean, cold and war is not appealing, obviously. And then with the United States, Canada, the Western world, I don't like it there. I don't feel like I fit in there. I don't like the vibe. I get really annoyed when I have to hear other people's opinions. Like, you wake up, you're half awake, you go to the coffee shop and like you're hearing opinions that you don't agree with and you're not even awake and you're just like, fuck, like I just want to get my coffee and get the fuck out of here. Um, and so I'd never really like liked that a lot of things in the United States. And I've gone to Asia before, Jakarta, Bali, and Bangkok. And Asia, obviously, right now has been super strict with COVID. One of the most strict regions in the world. And I think the Philippines president had said like, people were going to go to jail if they didn't get a COVID shot. So it's like, Asia is very prone to like being very submissive and following rules. And with COVID, that obviously accelerated. And I think it's opening back up. I got a couple buddies that are going back to Asia. It sounds like Bangkok, Thailand is like really good right now, super chill. But when I was in Asia, I did not really like the vibe. I understand why dudes do like it because it's like the most convenient place in the world, in my opinion. It's super cheap. You can get incredible apartments for less than $1,000 a month. Everything is super functional in a lot of those places. And it's great for networking if you're into business. Like I do think the Asia expat is a little bit more focused on making money, business, although they do go to Asia for degeneracy as well. But I kind of felt like an alien in Asia. Like I walk around the mall as a jacked white dude, and people would stare at me. Like that was really evident in Jakarta. I'm walking around the mall and literally people are like double taking, looking at me because my gym was in the
And
mall.
and for people that are unfamiliar, like give us your height, weight right now.
I'm 5'11" without shoes, about 215 pounds. I'm on testosterone and human growth hormone. So I'm fairly large, not super tall, but like I'm pretty big.
Yeah,
Um,
you look bigger than 215, I would say.
yeah. So like when I get when I get a pump at the gym, right? and then I'd go walk through the mall to go back to my apartment, like people in Asia would look at me like I was a zoo animal. And so that was funny. It was kind of cool for like a week, but after that, it just got kind of odd. And so I don't know. I didn't really vibe with Asia. And initially, I booked a flight to Panama because it was the cheapest flight I could find internationally. I got a flight from Miami to Panama City. I think it was like $80 on shitty Spirit Airlines, and so that was like I think I'd saved up 10 or 12K with my corporate job, and I was like looking to stretch that money as long as possible. And so I had looked at flights to the Philippines. I had looked at flights to Europe. I think the cheapest one I'd found to the Philippines was like $600 or $700. I think the cheapest one I'd found to Asia or Europe was like 550, something like that. And like I think I had some Southwest points. So I flew to Miami, and then from there, I spent a few nights with a buddy, and then I went to Panama, and it cost me less than $100. So that was like my initial reason for Latin America. Like I'd read some blogs, I'd read some forums, and then I found a super cheap flight, and I was like, "That's perfect. Let's do it." When I got to Latin America, my first trip was incredible. It was just awesome. Like I was, partying, going to incredible places like San Blas Islands in Panama, Monteverde Cloud Forest in Costa Rica, San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua for surfing. So like I was literally like, having a great time partying, having a great time dating, and then just doing all this cool nature shit too, like learning to surf, snorkeling, hiking in the cloud forest. And so I kind of fell in love with it on my first trip. And then when I started traveling that next year, I started making a little bit of money online. I started going to like some of the best places in Latin America, like Lima, Peru, Colombia, Medellin, Bogota, Cali. And, obviously, like you go to Colombia in 2015, 2016, like you're going to fall in love with it. You're not going to want to leave. And so it kind of like got into my blood. And there was like a sense of freedom and a sense of adventure that you just couldn't find, in the United States. I think there was a little sense of danger back then that made it even more exciting. And also, you're like the only gringo in these massive cities, or you and your buddies are, or whatever. And so you kind of feel like a modern day like conquistador. And so that type of like energy and stuff like gets into your blood. And I think Latin America, it's such a big place. You have 20 over 20 countries. I think it's like 690 million people. You have every type of landscape, biodiversity. In Latin America, it's super multiracial. You have like super pale people in southern Brazil, and then you have black people in the Dominican Republic. You have more indigenous looking people in Peru or southern Mexico or Guatemala. So it's not like a homogeneous region like Asia very much is, or Europe very much is. It's more multicultural, and people don't look at you like you're an alien for walking around like a white dude, because almost every country in Latin America, like, the upper class people are going to look very European. And so it was kind of easier to get acclimated and get assimilated due to the fact that you're not a fucking alien.
Do you feel at all that you're like pigeonholed into the Latin America thing? Because it does seem to be that it's not just a, how you got started or what was best in the past 2 years thing, but you've really sort of like made your brand like I'm a Latin America guy. Do you think you'd be able to switch it up, or do you feel like very committed to Latin America?
I think I could switch it up if I needed to. But am I planning to? I wouldn't say I'm planning to, because again, like you've got so many countries here. Like the vibe in Buenos Aires or southern Brazil is going to be not very similar, but like probably pretty similar to some European vibes.
Mhm.
Obviously slightly different with the language and the culture, but Buenos Aires, from my experience there, from what everybody says, is like a very European styled city, right? And you kind of are able to get everything in Latin America that you could want just because it's so big, it's so diverse. There's so many countries, there's so many cultures. Um, if you want to be around like kind of a budding tech scene with a bunch of entrepreneurs, like you probably do that in Sao Paulo. Even Guadalajara like has
Hmm.
like a tech scene right now,
Hmm.
where you're like you go meet people. Like let's say you go to a jiu-jitsu class, you're gonna meet people that are doing cool shit like locals. And so, if you want to hang around like sharp people, you can go to certain places. You want to have a European vibe, you can go to certain places. You want to go to the beach, obviously, you can do that. So many different places. Go to a small beach town, go to a huge beach city. You want to go hiking. Like it kind of has everything. And so I don't feel super pigeonholed because I've tried to build my brand more as the region as a whole, not in like a specific country. I would
Definitely.
feel more pigeonholed if I'm like, oh, I'm the Panama guy, or I'm the Argentina guy, or I'm the Mexico guy.
Yeah, and actually, as an aside, I guess me and OG Vance, we'd always laugh about this. How there was the Panama guy, and there was the Peru guy, and all these guys, and we always thought it was funny. But it was like it's a good gimmick though.
Yeah,
What do you
you're
think?
talking about the YouTube guys, right?
Basically, yeah. So there's the like Gringos TV guys, and they're each like it's like the Power Rangers and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And there every couple months there's like a new guy, and it's like I'm the Guatemala guy. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's a pretty solid grift if we're being honest. Like, you go down and you just start making YouTube videos about a specific country. You talk about how much you love it, whether you really do or don't. Uh, and you're going to get a bunch of followers from the locals. You're going to get a bunch of followers from like expats that are looking to move there or are already living there. So it's a great grift. I think a lot of those guys kind of fell off though. Like the one dude, like Dustin Luke or whatever, that used to be like
Hmm.
huge in Argentina. I don't even think he lives in
Hmm.
Argentina anymore. Um, so it's like a lot of those dudes that pigeonholed themselves, they end up kind of wanting to leave that country, and then their brand completely like disappears or falls off, or not completely, but obviously like I don't even know if that Zach Morris kid in Colombia makes a lot of videos anymore.
Hmm.
um, so I think a lot of those dudes just end up kind of pigeonholing themselves, and after 3 4 5 years, they want to move on, and they're kind of like stuck. So yeah, I think if you do that, you unless you're like, I mean, if you did that in Brazil or Mexico, you probably would be fine. But you do that in like Honduras or Guatemala or Nicaragua, like you're pretty pigeonholed.
Hmm. Um, Kind of a related question. Do you think that your brand could ever cross over into the mainstream, or even if you wanted it to? And have you tried to like reach out to some of these more like squeaky clean guys, and I don't know, maybe just there's like a line of degeneracy they don't cross, or maybe in their private life they actually are degens or something. But um, yeah, I don't know. I think everyone, certainly I respect you for not watering down your content over the years, like how RSD sort of ruined their brand by watering down. Arguably, with My Latin Life, we've definitely watered down as well. You've been gracious enough to not water down. I don't know. Do you think there's like a future where you could like cross over and be more mainstream, or are you always going to be more for like the hardcore guys?
I mean, I watered my stuff down a little bit because I think if I didn't, I would get banned from like every platform. um, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't really particularly care about like mainstream, or I guess you'd be like internet famous. Like none of that stuff is remotely appealing to me. Um, and I like the ability to be able to filter out people and like find kind of like a tribe of people that like think like me and are a little bit more bro, a little bit more, I guess, degen, if you want to call it like that. um, because I just don't, I think the travel niche is so cookie cutter. There's some dudes doing some cool stuff on YouTube, but other than that, like nobody's actually writing like interesting stuff about travel. If you Google any travel term, it's literally just
Mhm.
like culture trip bullshit.
Well, what's cool is that you're opinionated. Like you'll say if something sucks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'd rather like if people are following me and they like my shit and they enjoy like my content, whatever. I'd rather give them good advice than like try to like sugarcoat it. So if I think somewhere sucks, I'm just going to tell them because I'd rather those guys not go there. And it's not like me trying to like save a city. Oh, this place is great. I'm going to like give dudes bad advice. It's just like, no, that place sucks. Like, I don't like it. I don't like it. That's my opinion. You might, but if I were you and you kind of think like me and you like my tweets, these places are better. And so I try to give dudes like that think like me and things like that, like advice that will actually help them,
Hmm.
versus trying to like make it cookie cutter and like please the masses. So I mean
Yeah,
maybe
it makes it more relatable. It makes it more trustworthy, I think.
yeah, and I mean maybe some people that are like more like obviously famous and like have these big brands and about travel and are like pretty clean, like they probably wouldn't be interested in like collabing with me, but that doesn't bother me one bit. Like it's no skin off my back because like again I'm writing for dudes that think like me, and I'm creating stuff for dudes that kind of like think like me versus trying to appeal to this like mass market audience of like you know people that are traveling, women travelers and whatever you want to call it, like SWJ travelers that think like any place with brown people is cool. I'm like, I just disagree with that. I judge people by their character, and in certain cities I like people, in certain cities I don't. I don't care what color they are. It's irrelevant to me. And I think it's pretty silly when like people go to Cuba or they go to like Guatemala or something, and they're like, "Oh man, Cuba's so authentic. It was so wonderful." Da 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 da. And I'm like, "No, Cuba's a shithole. It's an absolute shithole. Like the majority of people in that country are just straight hustlers, and they have no money, which I feel bad for them. But it's like it doesn't make it a pleasant travel experience." And the same thing, like people go on trips to Guatemala and stay in hostels and do volunteering and be like, "Oh, the people are so happy with so little," and da da da. It's like fuck that. Like you don't think if you gave them 50 grand, they wouldn't be happier? Of course they would. So it's like, I think it's pretty like a lot of the people that search for like mainstream travel when they talk about authentic travel experiences is like hanging out with poor people and hanging out with like people of different races with them. And I think that's just retarded. I think it's silly.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas, like in my opinion, you have great travel experiences. Doesn't matter what somebody looks like. It's like you enjoy hanging out with them. You enjoy their company, whether they're an expat, whether they're a local. If you can like talk with them, like I have a bunch of jiu-jitsu buddies in Mexico. We fucking love to like local Mexicans, Guadalajara, Mazatlan, a couple other places. And like, we always go out for the fights for UFC and we talk shit and it's a great time. And that's a more like authentic travel experience to me than like volunteering in Guatemala with people that literally are just happy you're giving them free shit.
Hmm. So a couple of Twitter questions that came in sort of related to this without being too negative, but what are some of your least favorite places and why?
um, so I mean, I just talked about how much I hated Cuba. Don't like Cuba whatsoever. I think most people would agree like Cuba's cool for a weekend, 3 or 4 nights, and then it's literally terrible. I don't like places that like are super digital nomad, gringo, like expatty. And so one of my least favorite places is like Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Tulum, which on paper should be like fantastic. But in practice for me, it's just like you're basically moving abroad to hang out with, like people that look like the people you went to college with, people that think like the people you went to college with. I mean, it's just too many. It's too mass marketed. It's too packaged. I just don't enjoy it. And same kind of thing with Mexico City. Like, there's so many foreigners in Mexico City that you can't like if you want a real experience, you can't even live in the nice areas. Like you live in Condesa, you live in Roma Norte, like you're getting a gringo experience.
Hmm.
Whereas like you go to let me think. I mean, even in Mazatlan, right? Like somewhere we've both been, Like there's not very many gringos in Mazatlan. And so you're going to make friends with the locals. Like when I would go out, even when I had a group of buddies in Mazatlan that were all expats, we would go to the club with like 4 or 5 of our local buddies from jiu-jitsu as well, who were like great friends. Like we're still in touch to this day. And that was a much more enjoyable experience for me personally to hang out with those type of people versus like the hustlers in Playa del Carmen that only see you as like a dollar sign.
It's almost like you like the gringoified areas that are built for gringos, but where the gringos haven't arrived yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not gringofied in my opinion because like in Mexico, for example, Mexico has a pretty big economy. And so they're like in Mazatlan, they're building like I think right now there's 17 new apartment buildings being built, and the majority of those are going to be sold to Mexicans. They're going to be sold to upper middle
Hmm.
class and upper class people from Guadalajara, from Culiacan, from Durango, from Monterrey, from Chihuahua,
For sure.
um, and so it's not like it's gringofied. It's just like they're the economy in these places is not based on international tourism. And so there's still like nice neighborhoods and nice areas in these cities. And it's for domestic, it's for people that live in the city, it's for domestic travelers. And when you're in those type of places, like no matter what you want to say, what people say, right? Like the locals, when it's a local tourist spot, like domestic travel, it's far more chill. Like people are friendlier, there's less scams, like it's just a more enjoyable experience. um and so yeah, I definitely prefer that. I'm trying to think where else.
No, I get it. I was just trying to push back a bit, just
Yeah,
to
yeah,
just
yeah, no,
just to fuck with you. But
no, you're
um,
good.
all right. So I have a sort of a related question, which is sort of like there is an upper class in Latin America, and it is uh, much more of a class-based society than North America is, where people feel like they're sort of born into a certain social class and that they're kind of like stuck there for life. Whereas an American sort of thinks when they're born into a certain social class that is just temporary. But in Latin America, they think it's like permanent. And every novella is really about, someone from an upper class and someone from a lower class and like worlds collide and that kind of thing. Have you like made or do you see yourself making like solid inroads into sort of like joining the upper class in Latin America? Obviously, you're, planting seeds in Mexico and Panama, a couple places. Do you see yourself trying to join the upper class in these countries? Like, do you want to try to like get a ownership stake in one of the soccer teams in Mexico, or sit on the boards of companies, or I don't know, go to fancy charity dinners, things like that?
No, I mean that's not a motivation for me whatsoever. um I It's interesting, like especially in places like Panama that are super expat friendly, I guess. The upper middle class and the upper class is kind of like fairly small, but since there's been so many expats there for so long, people that actually have money, are doing business in Panama or investing in Panama, there's a good synergy there. Like you can meet a lot of cool middle to upper class Panamanians that are like down to go get dinner, down to go chill out, down to they speak good English, whatever. So I thought Panama, that was actually one of the things I enjoyed about Panama was the upper class people there are super open to hanging out with foreigners, to broing out with foreigners. I one of my jiu-jitsu buddies there, I think his family owned like all the KFCs and Pizza Huts in all of Panama. He was a super cool guy. He'd go watch fights together. Good dude. So like Panama, that was one of the cool things about Panama. And it really is dependent, I think, if you're trying to make like connections like that on what city you're in. In certain places, those people are going to be a little more closed off, whereas in other places, you're going to be able to meet friends and make friends pretty easily. And so I found the smaller the country, the easier it is to kind of make friends with those type of people. For example, in Paraguay, like my one of my best buddies in Paraguay. When I was in Paraguay, there were no gringos there. It's changed a little bit,
Hmm.
but when I was there, it was me and the U.S. Embassy guys, and that was it. And my best friends in Paraguay that I'm still in touch with to this day were these two local Paraguayan guys and this one Spanish guy that lived there. And they were super cool guys, funny, hilarious. Like we did a bunch of cool shit together. But it was funny because one night we had went to this nature reserve, and we had went and we were camping there, and we were broing out, and we were, just having a great time, smoking weed, chilling. And like the next day, me and the Spanish guy who, we're going to go to Brazil, and we had already had this plan. And the local Paraguayan guy that was with us, he's like, I can't go. They're like, bro, like, what are you talking about? Like, you can go. Like, you don't have anything to do right now. He's like, no, I really can't. And we're like, why can't you go? He's like, I got a dinner with the president tomorrow night. And we're like, oh, okay. So like in those smaller countries, you can kind of make friends with a lot of the
You
upper
get more
class.
access.
Yeah, yeah, because they're curious what you're doing there. Their social circle is pretty small, and so as you come in there as a foreigner and they think you're cool, like they're super game to hang out with you. Whereas like in Mexico City or Guadalajara or Medellin, you know, that might be a little bit more difficult because not only is there tons and tons of gringos in these cities, but the upper class, is a little bit more isolated. Um, and there's tons of wealthy people in these cities, and they don't necessarily want to associate with foreigners. And so it's a little bit different, kind of depending on where you are. Or like a place like Mazatlan, I had a bunch of good buddies in Mazatlan, but none of them were like super upper class, because I mean that there's implications with that in Mazatlan.
For sure. I mean, this is a topic that interests me a lot, and I would love to just hear any more anecdotes that you have about sort of like cracking into the upper class in Latin America and that experience.
I mean, yeah, the Paraguay was definitely one that was super cool. Paraguay was weird to me because like I would go to these, like Paraguay is a very poor country, and um, it was weird to me when I would hang out with my upper class friends there, and we'd go to these bars, and I'm from Kansas, and there'd be people that graduated from the University of Kansas, Paraguayans, because
Hmm.
they had like an exchange program. And there would be a lot of Paraguayans that were like working in the United States, kind of in this social circle. And they'd be like, bro, what are you doing in Paraguay? Like, da 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 da. I'm like, oh, I love it here. They're like, oh, okay, that's cool. I'm glad you like it. I live in Los Angeles. I live in Boston. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That's cool, man. And it was funny because like a lot of those upper class people in Paraguay kind of wanted to like leave. And I had a really funny conversation. I think the minimum wage in Paraguay is like 300 or 400 bucks, right? Like very
Hmm.
low for like a monthly salary. And somehow like the topic of money had came up at a bar we were at one night. And there was this one guy, he had graduated from a super prestigious university in the United States. Great guy, love the guy. And, I was talking about one of my buddies who had, was making like 4 or 5 grand a month online. This is when I had started to make more money online, and was doing a lot better. And he was like, oh, is 4 or 5 grand a month like good money to you? I'm like, I mean, it's okay. Yeah. Like, it's not terrible, but obviously like you want to make way more than that. And he was like, oh, okay. Because for us, like, that's not a good salary. Cause like they were like the top one of 1% in Paraguay. Um, and so that was kind of funny to me to hear that thing when like I'm talking about my buddy making a salary that's like 10 to 12 times the local minimum wage. Uh, but to the upper class in Paraguay, that was pennies. Um,
Hmm.
so that was super interesting. In Panama, obviously, there's tons of money, tons of money. I was able to meet up with some really uh, cool people in Panama that were also very, I guess, influential in the country. And their families and stuff. They were some of the founding families of Panama, and they had more money than God. And it was super interesting to see that, and then go to the jiu-jitsu gym where you're hanging out with dudes that are like scraping by, and it was a really unique contrast to like go to jiu-jitsu class where you're bros with like some of the lower to middle class people, and they're super cool, and you go out with these people and you enjoy, you love hanging out with them and you love training with them and stuff and talking shit. And then on the flip side, that night you go to a dinner with somebody who literally, like, their family was like, you know instrumental in the history of Panama. And so it was a pretty unique kind of like mind fuck to be in that type of
Hmm.
situation.
Hmm. And I think that's one of the cool things about being a gringo in Latin America is that you do sort of get you get a bit of access into that world if you so desire.
Yeah, I mean, I've never tried to force myself into that, but like it just kind of happenstance happened a few times, and it's super interesting to see the differences between how the upper class in Latin America lives versus how the lower class or the middle class lives. Like, one dude has a six-figure car, and then that's literally like might be more money in that car than like somebody in his country will make in their lifetime. And so it's a
Hmm.
crazy contrast to think about.
The wealth gap.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll switch it up. And I wanted to ask you about internationalizing. Obviously, this is something that you and I, on Twitter and whatnot, we've been talking about and inspiring people about a lot, which is getting multiple passports, multiple residencies. And I wanted to know, Jake, when this sort of all kicked off for you, because it seems like you weren't internationalizing for the first couple of years of your adventure in Latin America, but at some point along the way, things seem to have clicked, and you started, emphasizing setting up multiple bases and internationalizing.
Yeah, I think that's a two-part process. The first thing is once you start getting some money, um, you kind of start like thinking, well, maybe I should start investing. Like, should I buy a property here? Should I start, some type of business in these countries because you have some capital to do so? And so that was the first thing I was thinking about. Like, do I want to buy an apartment in Mazatlan? Do I want to buy an apartment in Panama? Do I want to buy an apartment in Colombia? Do I want to buy, Colombia and get some really cheap apartments? Do I want to buy two or three apartments in Colombia and like start an Airbnb business? I have a really good friend that does that and does very well with it. And so once I started looking, kind of viewing things from that lens, I started going down the rabbit hole of like permanent residency, getting second passports, all those type things. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened and like the United States passport was worthless, I really started to be like, I need to get residencies and passports. I have to do that because this, I don't want to be stuck in the United States. I don't want to be going and visiting my family for a week and then my passport comes worthless. I can't even go back to Mexico. And so once COVID really opened my eyes to like the necessity to be able to have access to a country because you're a permanent resident or a citizen there, I started going down that rabbit hole even further, and I ended up going to the Nomad Capitalist Conference in 2021 with a couple of my good buddies and really researching how to start doing those things. And the first permanent residency I got was in Panama. It was right before they were closing or changing the Friendly Nations program.
And that's when we first met.
Yeah, and that's when we were. I think you were picking up your cedula or you're picking up your PR. I think you had already gotten it. You were further along in the process than I was, um, and so that was my first foray into getting the PR. And then now I have a permanent residency in Mexico due to my child, and I'll be a citizen here in Mexico in I think 18 months. And so those are kind of my two first forays into, getting residency, getting a passport in Latin America. And I'm currently working on a few other programs, Honduras, and then one in Armenia as well. I think you're working on Armenia as well. Obviously, that program got changed. And, I think the combination of wanting to invest where you might live, along with wanting to have the ability to, leave the United States or stay indefinitely in a country, those are the two factors that led me down the rabbit hole and getting really interested in internationalization, starting to study the stuff, do it myself, try to help people with it as well, kind of like you are.
Right. So not just be a perpetual traveler, but really have the ability to spend time somewhere without doing visa runs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like there's countries you can live in Latin America as a tourist year round. Um, Mexico and Dominican Republic being two prime examples. But, if you want a more permanent place, even just like a base city that you spend half the year, it makes sense to get like a residency because you're going to have way more rights than a tourist. A lot of places it's hard to sign a lease off Airbnb if you're not a permanent resident. And
Hmm.
so having that ability to, you know, it just gives you a lot more rights in countries and it gives you a lot more freedom. I think it's a great plan B because, like we've seen with COVID, the governments can take our rights at any moment. And I think by having multiple permanent residencies, potentially multiple passports, you give yourself a lot more flexibility to escape tyranny. And I think with what's coming down the pipe with CBDCs and a social credit system, carbon credits, like you're going to really want to have those backup plans in place before they start implementing some of the more draconian measures.
And so when you did the Panama thing, or when you were in Panama, let's just say, that was, I think, before you even went to the Nomad Capitalist Conference for the first time. So where were you learning about Panama, and what motivated you to finally pull the trigger and be like, okay, it's time to set up a base somewhere?
No, that was actually after because I went to the Nomad
Mm.
Capitalist Conference in Playa del Carmen in May in 2021, and I was in Acapulco, Mexico. I think in July of 2021, and a Twitter friend of mine, Mr. Brad Justice, wrote me and was like, "Hey, because we had talked about this a little bit after the Nomad Capitalist Conference. He was like, "Hey, by the way, the Panama Friendly Nations program is changing. If you have any interest in that, you should go to Panama tomorrow." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, right now it's easy. You put money in a bank, you work with a lawyer, you get it done. You start a company, it takes like 2-3 weeks." He's like, "If you don't get it done before August, I think it was like 18th, that program is going to completely change. And you're going to have to invest in the country to be able to get that permanent residency." I was like, "Oh shit." So I got in contact with the lawyer he had recommended. And I was in Panama like 2 weeks later getting that process started. And so that was like, there was kind of like a little pressure from a standpoint to get that done. And so that's why I got that
Yeah,
first one
makes
done.
sense.
Yeah.
And were you like familiar with all the flag theory concepts for many years preceding this? It just took you a while to pull the trigger, or was that something that you only learned about more recently?
I didn't really worry about it too much because I didn't really plan to stay in any country more than like 3 to 6 months. So for the first 5 or 6 years I was traveling, it wasn't a big deal to me. I think in 2019, I was in Paraguay and I was considering like staying in Paraguay long term. And so I started looking at like the permanent residency program there, just kind of like out of the blue. And I didn't pull the trigger at that time. I should have. It would have been super easy. But then that kind of introduced me to the idea, and I started doing some research. And I'd also done some research about living in Colombia and Brazil full time, and how without like some type of residency in either one of those countries, it's a little bit difficult to like you can either overstay your visa and pay a fine and potentially get like, I mean, some people have gotten quote unquote banned for overstaying too long or da da da. That's very rare, but it does happen. And so I had started looking at that as well in Brazil and Colombia. And then when COVID happened, it really opened my eyes because I think at a certain point I could only go to like Mexico and like two or three other countries. And so, that was super eye opening that my, 2-3 months before I had access to every country in the world almost. You know, there are a few obviously that don't let Americans in, but I could go to anywhere in Latin America with my American passport, get either a, you know, automatic visa or apply for a visa upon arrival other than Venezuela. And you know, I had access to the whole region with my American passport, and during COVID I didn't. And so that was a pretty eye-opening to see that, like, maybe I need to get a second passport, maybe I need to get a permanent residency, so I can have access to these places, um, you know, during these crazy times.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's crazy that you went to Paraguay, uh, years ago, and it wasn't even for permanent residency purposes. You just went for adventure, and that's back when they still had like the 150 US dollar visa, and you were willing to pay that visa, and you went to the country basically just to explore and do adventure shit.
Yeah, I mean, I love going to off the beaten path places, and I had one friend that had gone to Paraguay, uh, and he was telling me about it. You know, he's like, "Oh, bro, this place is great. Da 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 da. Like, you got to go here." And I think at that time I was hiking in Patagonia, and he had just been there like a month before, and we were talking about it. And I think I had a trip planned to Chile with my dad, and I didn't have any plans after that. And he was just hyping Paraguay up. And so eventually, after he hyped it up so much, I'm like, fuck it, like I'll go spend some months in Paraguay. And I started looking at Airbnbs, and they were super cheap. I was like, fuck it, like why not? And so I went to Paraguay, and yeah, there was. I mean, I'm not joking. I think I was one of the only foreigners in the city. Like there was no
For
one.
sure.
Like when I posted a picture of Paraguay, or I talked about Paraguay on my Twitter back then, there was no one there. No one, no one, no one. The only Americans I had met the whole time, I think I was there for 3.5 months, were the U.S. Embassy guys. So those are the only like Americans I'd met. And so then, but I mean, Paraguayans are so friendly that it was just super easy to meet people. I actually had a flight from Santiago, Chile to Asuncion, and that's where I met some of my bros that were more like upper class bros there, and they were just like super excited that a foreigner was coming to Paraguay. They were like baffled. Like they're like, what are you? They're like, what are you doing in Paraguay? I'm like, I don't know. I work online. I just gonna come chill out here for like 3 or 4 months. Like, why? I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know. I just want to check it out. Like, I like going to places where there's no
Yeah.
gringos. And they're like, well, there's no gringos in Paraguay. You're going to fucking love it. I was like, okay. Um,
And so you would spend time in the high class neighborhoods, the Villa Moras and Recoletas of the world. But I even remember you had a YouTube channel for a bit that, like, I guess all the videos are on private or whatever. But you went up to the Cerro Cora National Park, which is like right on the border of Paraguay and Brazil. Um, and what they have in this park is they have basically like a statue commemorating where Mariscal Lopez died, basically ending the Triple Alliance War. And there's like a video of you, like a vlog, and you have some guides with you, and they're just like pointing, and they're just like, "This is where Lopez died," and there's a little statue. And I could tell you didn't fully like grasp the like historical significance of it. You're like, "Cool, like,
yeah.
like statue," but like, but that's just how early it was. Is that you were like basically probably one of the first like gringos to ever be there. You know what I mean?
Oh, that place was, yeah, that place was crazy because I was there with my Spanish buddy, and we went to, like, that park is right outside this city called Pedro Juan Caballero, which there's literally no border. It's right on the border with Brazil, and the city next to it is called Ponta Porta. And
Yeah.
so it's like this Brazilian Paraguayan little like city. Like I think there's like 350,000 people in the metro between those two cities. But it's known as like a cocaine running hotspot because like the narcos from Bolivia run drugs through the north of Paraguay, and then they take it to the Paraguayan city and they transfer it to Brazil. And then in Brazil, Brazil's the second largest cocaine user market in the world. And so like there's just like retarded amounts of money going through this little shithole city, and it's a little bit dangerous. But that park is right outside of it. And so me and my Spanish buddy, we stayed there a few nights, and we went to that park, and we get to the entrance to that park, and we're talking to the guide, but he's not a guide. He's just like the park ranger. And so
Mm-hmm.
he gives us a few directions, and then he's like, have fun at the park. And we're like, okay. And this park is like not well like mapped out. There's not really that many trails, and there's no one there. So we asked the guide like, how many people are here today? He's like, you guys. We're like, oh, okay. We're like, how many people have been here this week? He's like a Paraguayan, a Brazilian, and an Australian. It was like Thursday. So like no one goes to this place.
Mm-hmm.
So we're walking through this park, and like there's sand. Like this park, there's sand. There's no beaches by, but there's no footprints. Like this sand has no footprints. Nobody's been there for a long time. And so we end up getting lost 4 or 5 different times. Like we have no fucking clue where we are. There's no cell signal. And so we're just like lost, and like, you walk for like an hour and you finally see a sign that tells you to go somewhere. And so we kept getting lost. That hike was supposed to take like 2 hours or 2.5 hours or whatever. We ended up there like 6 hours. It was pretty, I think, like somewhere around there. But yeah, it was crazy. And you hear it's such like raw, undeveloped nature. You hear like animals moving, and there's jaguars and there's a bunch of different animals out there, and you just have no clue. It's just super wild. Like you hear like a big ass animal moving, and you stop moving, and you're like, what the fuck is that? Because like, this park, I think, it's, you just don't know. And so that was one of the crazier hikes of my life, because it was just like borderline unmarked,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have a map. We didn't have a guide. Eventually we made it to the top of the little like tabletop mountain thing. That was cool. Had a great view, was super fun. But that was like one of the more wild adventures, because that place is like, it's a national park, but it's not like,
It's very wild. It's very crazy that you went there in
yeah,
2018 or whatever it was.
yeah. It's like,
Even in even in 2021, I went to a yerba mate factory, the Pajarito, which is like the biggest brand. I went to the Pajarito factory in Encarnacion in 2021 with our mutual friend Javier, and we go and we meet up with the tour guide lady, and I was like, hey, who else has done the tour here? And they're like, you're the first person in over a month to do the tour of the number one yerba mate factory, like right near like the second or third biggest city. And I'm like, this is insane.
yeah.
Like it's like how under touristed it is.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, there's no real tourist attractions there. Like if you think about it, there's nothing in Paraguay that you have to do. Like,
I would say visit a yerba mate factory, and no one
I,
had done it in over a
I
month.
mean, all right, a yerba mate factory might be it, but I mean, there's no like beaches there. There's no
Mhm.
Patagonia hikes. There's no like Mayan ruins. There's no like hidden cities. So it's like the tourism
I mean,
there
a
is,
little bit. There's like the Jesuit ruins and stuff, and
yeah, I guess there's
yeah.
that. But I mean, it's just such an undeveloped tourist sector that like,
Hmm.
you can go to some crazy places and have the whole place to yourself. So it's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. Speaking of like factory tours, if anybody is ever in Santiago de los Caballeros in the Dominican Republic, you absolutely have to go to this factory tour. I think it's the Aurora Cigar Factory. Best tour of my life. Like there's a dude there that is like a polyglot name. I want to say his name is Eugene, and like you walk in, and it's like a private tour. You have to schedule it a few days before. They don't get that many foreigners, obviously. That's not a popular spot, but they do get some. So you have to schedule it a few days before, and they only do private groups, and it's free. You just like pay what you want. And you show up, and this Eugene guy is like the most personable human of all time. You walk in, he hands you a cigar, he lights it for you, and he starts showing you around, and he gives you a full tour of the place. And there's like hundreds of workers, and like they show you everything about how hand rolling cigars works. And the dude's hilarious, and he introduces you to all the workers. And that was like what my best like tour experience of my life, because it was hilarious. They all thought I looked like a famous Cuban actor, like a telenovela Cuban actor, and so everybody wanted to take photos with me. So I think I had like 15 people take photos with me. This was like in 2015. So that tour was incredible. Like if you're ever in Dominican Republic, you got to do that.
So, how do you think traveling and living in Latin America has changed from when you got started some 8 years ago, even like 4 or 5 years ago, compared to what it is now?
I think there's five to 10x more people down here now, like foreigners that are living down here. I think Latin America was pretty much the same. I mean, obviously the hot spots were Medellin, um, Mexico City, Playa del Carmen. I guess you could argue Lima, Peru, and Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro. Those places were getting tourists and some expats and stuff before COVID, but nowhere else was. Nowhere, in my opinion. Like you go to Paraguay, you go to Bolivia, you go to Cali, Colombia, you go to Nicaragua, go to El Salvador, go to even Guadalajara or Mazatlan. There were no foreigners, like very, very few foreigners. I remember in 2018, I was in Guadalajara and my Uber driver was like baffled that a gringo was like living in Chapultepec. And she like tried to like hook me up with her daughter, which I was like, thought that was funny. But nowadays, like because of COVID, because of all the expats kind of like moving from Asia, moving from Europe, because Latin America has probably been one of the more open regions during COVID. I think it's 10x. And then obviously you have people doing remote work way more now than they used to. And obviously, if you're an American or Canadian, flights to Latin America are significantly shorter, significantly cheaper than going anywhere else. And so you
Hmm.
definitely have seen a massive influx in 2021 and 2022 to Latin America, to the point where uh, a lot of my friends are like, Jake, don't share our secret spots on Twitter. Don't write about our secret spots because there's so many people down here. And I get that on one hand, but on the other hand, it's like 95% of people are going to Mexico City, going to Playa del Carmen, going to Panama City, going to Medellin, going to Lima, going to Buenos Aires, going to Sao Paulo, going to Rio de Janeiro. So um, the region's so big, it's not something I'm concerned about because you have 700 million people. Um, but it's definitely taken off.
What are the criteria for a hidden gem?
I mean, like you had responded to one of my tweets, like you basically just have to get on the top 50 most dangerous cities list and look at places that are super dangerous because that's going to scare off the gringos. And then once you find those cities on the most dangerous cities list, then you got to start researching to see if they're actually nice or if they're a true shithole. And if you find a city on the most dangerous cities list that has some nice areas, looks like it's a semi pleasant place to live, other than like getting robbed, raped, and murdered, those are hidden gems.
I feel like there's hidden gems for dating, and then there's hidden gems for everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. Like, I think Mazatlan was a hidden gem for a long time, for pretty much all aspects. Like you got this
Hmm.
beautiful beach
For
town,
sure.
great Malecon, good nightlife, cute chicks, and obviously now like a lot more people are going there. I still don't think it's overrun, but it's also a small city. Like if five gringos go there every month for the next year, then it's going to get a lot less pleasant. Um, but if you're looking for hidden gems, I think the best thing to do is either look for really small, shitty countries or huge countries, and then look at some of the mid-sized cities. In Mexico, 130 million people, Mexico City, Playa del Carmen, and Puerto Vallarta, Cabo, Guadalajara get a lot of gringos. But if you go to a place like, well, I think we've talked about it, Veracruz, I doubt there's very many gringos there. Now, is it that pleasant of a place to be? I don't know. I haven't been there personally, but on paper, it looks like it could be fun. So that might be like a hidden gem.
Hmm.
Um, if you go to Colombia, right? Like most foreigners in Colombia start in Medellin. They maybe go take a trip to the coast to go to Cartagena or Santa Marta. Maybe if they're feeling adventurous, they go to Bogota or Cali, but that's about the extent of it. But there's another 4 or 5 cities in Colombia that are, have almost 1 million people that you could check out that there probably aren't going to be many foreigners in. They might be awesome. Like a place like Pereira or Manzanales. Armenia sucks. Don't go to Armenia. Those type of places are like incredible places to live, but they're not going to get that many foreigners. And so those are the type of places you'd want to look. All of Brazil outside of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro is basically a hidden gem. I mean, there's no, like, if you go to, what's the third biggest city in Brazil?
I think Curitiba,
No, Belo Horizonte, right?
Belo Horizonte. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, there's no gringos in Belo Horizonte. None. It's a city of like 4 million people, 5 million people. It's gorgeous. It's safe. It's livable. There's no gringos there, right? So, like, that's a hidden gem. Not that it's hidden. You look at the population statistics, like it's the third biggest city in Brazil, but there's just no foreigners there. So, Latin America is big enough to where if you want to stay away from foreigners, I think you're always going to be able to and still live in nice places, have good dating options, have cool shit to do. Um, I just think some of the more popular places are going to probably get worse.
I visited Toronto this summer and I was stunned at how many Latinos there were. And obviously, I think the US is becoming more and more Latinized every year, more Mexicanized, etc. And so I think what we're seeing is just seeing basically that the world is flat. And I think you're going to see basically less polarization in terms of you know what I mean, in terms of North Americans versus Latin Americans, and I think you're going to see more of like a mix basically everywhere. And I mean, what do you think things are going to look like in like 50, 100 years from now?
I mean, I don't have a clue, to be honest. I kind of have a theory, like the upper class and the upper middle class in Latin America has really no desire to go to the United States or Canada. And so it's more like the middle class or the lower class that don't feel like they have any upward mobility that have that massive desire to go north. Um, that's kind of what I've noticed. And so I think that trend's going to continue. Obviously, like Canada is pretty easy to get a visa for almost anyone in Latin America. So you're going to see that continue. And then obviously, a lot of people just want to cross the border to the United States on foot and get asylum or whatever you want to call it. So that's not going to slow down because the there isn't as much upward mobility down here for a lot of people, and there's a lot of different factors that play into that. But ultimately, the work that a lower class individual does in Latin America, like a maid, for example, makes $400 a month. They cross the border to the United States or Canada and their salary like 10x's instantly. And so that's obviously always going to be a motivating factor for a lot of people that are looking to increase their economic, standing in the world. And so that's not going to slow down. I think eventually countries are going to, I think that, I mean, I guess we'll see how it plays out. But on one hand, I think there is a potential that the days of free travel and going anywhere you want in Latin America or Asia or Europe on a tourist visa, those could eventually come to an end depending on how the geopolitical landscape looks. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think that kind of lends hand to, like, from our perspective, from people like us who are you know what I'm saying, that are trying to build an international plan, get permanent
Yep.
residencies, get second passports, invest in countries that are not our home countries. We're not going to have any issues, but you know, there could be a time where obviously COVID opened people's
It's
eyes.
definitely getting harder and harder.
Yeah,
We've experienced that, you and I, firsthand with Panama. We did a program there. The rules changed. They got harder. Paraguay, I've been telling you to do it. The rules just changed literally last week.
yeah.
I think Mexico, they've been basically everywhere. They've been changing it left and right. Um, okay, related question. So a couple of the Twitter people, the Twitter comments, they've been asking about farmland. I think just maybe just because partly because it sounds romantic. I don't know if they know you're such an expert because you're from Kansas, but where would where would you be looking to buy farmland in Latin America?
I know I have a buddy that's looking into it in Paraguay. Obviously, the soil in Paraguay is very good. There's huge swaths of land that are not farmed. So that probably, I mean, off the top of my head, that would be one I'd look at. Um, I mean, I think Brazil probably has some really good farmland. I mean, Brazil's so big; it's absolutely incredible.
It's true. It's
Uh,
got to be cheap. It's just so big.
yeah, like Brazil and Paraguay are going to have tons of farmland, so those would definitely be options. I haven't looked too much into it in Mexico because I've read some horror stories about your farmland not being your farmland if a certain group
Hmm.
of individuals wants it at a certain point. Um, and so I would say, yeah, somewhere like Brazil or Paraguay would be the places I would look initially, if that's something you're interested in.
Do you ever think that Mexico is just too goddamn dangerous to be worth it?
Yeah. Mm, for example, on Friday, I was at dinner with three buddies, all from Twitter, surprisingly, unsurprisingly, I guess. Um, and we were at this super nice restaurant in a mall, really cool place. Really,
Honduras?
no, Midtown.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Midtown Jalisco, I think so.
Yeah, brand new mall has some really good restaurants. And during that dinner, we saw a tweet from I think it was All Source News where there was just a shooting at the Sonora Grill in Terra Nova where like multiple people died, and it's crazy because I've been to that restaurant multiple times and never like felt unsafe. But then like and it was kind of weird because we could have gone to that restaurant. We could have been like, oh, let's go to Sonora Grill tonight. We didn't, obviously, but it's just crazy to think like that could have we could have been there at that time. We could have, that's a place I go to often. Same similar situation, but different. I was in Manzanillo, Mexico, training at this gym at the only mall there, tiny little city, tiny. Um, and there was an earthquake in Guadalajara in September, and that gym collapsed, and a person died in that gym. They died training, and it was another place I'd been. So it's kind of crazy when you look at Mexico. It doesn't feel unsafe when you're walking in the street. Like you do not feel uncomfortable walking in the street in most places in Mexico. You don't feel uncomfortable using your phone at a park or on Chapultepec or in Polanco or in Mazatlan on
Hmm.
the Malecon. You don't feel uncomfortable using your phone. Like you don't feel like there's street crime. But on the flip side, like people get killed and it's in public places. And so it's a very weird thing where it's like you don't feel uncomfortable until you see a news story about a place you've been where people died. And so it's a really weird thing.
It is. I don't want to perpetuate it too much, but definitely something to think about. I'll hit you with a lighter theme right now. One I know that's capturing your interest recently, which is buying a yacht or buying a boat. And we've been talking about this a little bit offline because I think it'd be pretty friggin' cool to have a boat. Um, yeah, man. Like, how far are you into looking into this?
Um, so I don't, I'm trying to start like really planting flags in a couple different cities. And so I'm really trying to get that started. I'd like to have two base cities and one of them be in nature, one of them be more of a big city. And I'm still playing through a few ideas in my head on how to exactly set that up from an internationalization standpoint. But I know the exact yacht I'm going to buy when I buy it. Um, and I've kind of concluded there's really maybe four vortex zones of yachting in Latin America.
The
And
yacht
so it would
vortex
have,
zones.
yeah, it'd have to be like in one of these four areas, right? So you've got the classic Caribbean with all the Caribbean islands, Grenada, Dominica, Guadalupe.
Right, but where do you dock that boat? Okay, so let me guess. So one of them is definitely like Panama City, basically. One of them is Mazatlan. What are the other places where you could potentially like dock it up?
Yeah, so like Pacific Coast Mexico, you've got like a dozen cities, I think
Yeah,
13. I think there's 13 cities in Pacific Coast Mexico that have marinas, which a marina is pretty important because if you're going to have a nice yacht, you want to have security
yeah, you
there, you
need
want to have a nice
yeah, yeah.
dock, you want to
Hmm.
have a hurricane hole. So there's like 13 in Pacific Coast Mexico. So that's an incredible like region to explore on a yacht. And then you have Panama, which has like 1,300 islands. So you have Panama City, you have the San Blas Islands, you have a marina right next to Cologne, you have Bocas del Toro, and there's a couple small marinas on the northern Pacific coast towards David. So you have a ton of exploring you could do there in Panama as well. So those are like the
Hmm.
two really good. And also from Panama, you could take your yacht to
Could you
Cartagena.
take it through the canal? Have you looked into that?
100%, yeah. Every like tons of people do that.
Do you know how much it would cost to take it through the canal?
I want to say it depends on the square, like how long the yacht is, and so I
Hmm.
think it starts around $500 and goes to like $1,500 to take it through the canal.
Okay.
Um, and so like you could have your yacht in Panama City and then take it through the canal, go to Bocas del Toro, go to San Blas Islands, and then you could take it down to Colombia and go to Cartagena, which sucks, and Santa Marta. So like you could do some exploring there with the yacht. So like Panama with a little bit of Colombia would be a great little zone to do yachting. Pacific Coast Mexico would be an incredible zone to do yachting. The classical yacht obviously is like pure Caribbean. All those little
Like
islands.
Miami.
Yeah, from
Hmm.
Miami all the way to Trinidad. That's like the classical Caribbean route. And then you've got another one that's kind of appealing. I guess I don't think it would be as appealing, but you could basically do like Cuba, the Yucatan in Mexico, Cancun, Cozumel, Isla Mujeres.
Like a
Take that.
Gulf of Mexico type vibe.
No, more like going south towards Central America, like Belize, Guatemala, and then Roatan.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
that's another one you could do. But I think like the best one, which I don't think it would be smart to do currently, you'd have to be a fucking psychopath in my opinion. But that would be like Venezuela. Venezuela has incredible infrastructure
I
for
mean,
yachts.
that's Trinidad, bro.
Yeah, like you could hold your yacht in Trinidad and then go to Isla Margarita. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of other ones.
So Mark Zolo did this recently. Were you following his trip? Because it was pretty harrowing.
Yeah, so he had like okay, that was a crazy trip for sure. He had a very small sailboat, a very old and very small sailboat that he was taking
Do you
on
know what
that.
the footage of his was?
I want to say it was 34 or 36 feet, which is, I mean, it's not tiny, but it's pretty small.
Hmm.
Um, and he was taking that from in that kind of classical Caribbean route of like doing the. I mean, I don't remember the
He
exact.
was trying to hit all the islands. He was trying to hit
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
Trinidad, Grenada, Barbados, St.
Yep.
Lucia,
Yep.
Martinique, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think he spent like 20 or 30 grand on that sailboat. So, um, he had a pretty cool adventure there, but it was I would want a little larger yacht that was a little bit newer that I could have a little more confidence in. But like yeah, like Venezuela, you have a yacht in Trinidad or in Cartagena, and you take that to Venezuela. You're gonna have to deal with some piracy potentially, but like you have access to some really cool places in Venezuela. I don't think that's a
So
good
when
idea.
you start getting that like footage length of the yacht up, dude, like how isn't that gonna cost like over 100 grand?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's expensive, and the maintenance on it is equally expensive. The marina fees are very expensive. But on the flip side, like some of these yachts that are 45, 50 feet, you've got two or three bedrooms, two bathrooms on them, a full kitchen, a living
Hmm.
room. They're super spacious. They're super comfortable. You could live on them full time. Um, so it's an interesting like lifestyle play in my opinion, and definitely something to consider. But yeah, yachting, that's been my mental masturbation for the past year, and I'm I will be pulling the trigger on that sooner than later.
I think like as a man or as a person, it's a really cool thing to sort of have mastery over the water and to understand that whole kind of world for sure.
Oh yeah, I think it's cool, and also if you think there's ever going to be another COVID, like living on your yacht might be like an incredible option. You just
Right. So you
go,
don't have to deal with land borders.
yeah, you could just go find like some island, like in, for example, in Panama, you could go cove out in one of the dozen islands in Bocas del Toro, or even if you want to get more adventurous, go to the Pacific coast. You're probably going to be able to do whatever the fuck you want and never be bothered. Um,
Do you think that like having a yacht could play into an internationalization strategy? I think everyone knows that there's like those, like international gambling junket boats where it's like, they leave from New Orleans or something and then they go into international waters and then you gamble and then come back, or I have no idea. But like, do you think that there's like, like, is there an international component to that? Because I haven't explored that too much.
I'm not sure. I mean, that's not something I've explored that much either. Obviously, if you get a big enough yacht, it's like a mobile house. So from an internationalization perspective, if one country does something you don't like, whether they become draconian with some laws or they change their tax structure, whatever, you just take
Hmm.
your yacht somewhere else. So from that perspective, it's pretty interesting. Do
Like,
I
what if you said like, you know how like when you have a business, they're like, okay, well, like, where's the center of operations or whatever, where's the office, and that sort of like impacts your tax structure. What if you're like, oh, well, like we make all our decisions as a company like in international waters? Like, I don't know, I'm just guessing here.
No, I don't know. I have no clue how that would play out. I actually have never heard of anybody doing that. Obviously, if they did, they'd probably want to keep it pretty under wraps. I just think the idea of like being able to move it around gives you a lot of flexibility, and a lot of adventure. You can, if it's your home and you've got this big yacht with a master bedroom and hot water and good Wi-Fi and somewhere to work, and you're like, well, I'm bored in this city, I'm going to go to a different city. And so I think that is the aspect that's the most appealing to me, because like you could be in Panama City and you're like, I'm tired of Panama. I'm just going to take my yacht and I'm going to go up to Costa Rica and I'm going to cruise around Costa Rica for 2 or 3 months. So that's the thing that's kind of appealing to me personally.
Yeah. It's as you know, offline, I've been looking into this as well, but I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, we won't talk
Um,
about that, but yeah, no, it's very interesting, especially from a lifestyle perspective.
for sure. Shit, man. Yeah, we've already gone over 2 hours, dude. Definitely super, super epic. I'm trying to think what else the people would want us to go over. Is there anything else that people like really like reach out to you for a lot that you think would be good to address?
Yeah, I guess the last thing would be like a lot of people reach out to me and they want to know, where should I go? Um, and so I guess the last thing I would say is like that's something you got to decide personally, and you got to decide what's like most important to you. Like, is dating the most important? Is being in a beach city or in the mountains most important? Is budget most important? I mean, there's just so many factors. But I will say, if
Hmm.
you've never been to Latin America and you're looking for like a beginner spot, there's a few places I really like. Buenos Aires, obviously, right now is so cheap. So if like budget is a concern, Buenos Aires is going to be incredible right now today. From December 1st to like June 15th, as a beginner spot in Latin America, Miraflores in Lima, Peru is incredible. It's a great place to get your feet wet. It's going to give you access to incredible hiking. It's going to give you access to go visit Machu Picchu. I mean, there's just a ton of cool things you can do in Peru, and you're going to be able to pick up some Spanish. You don't have to speak Spanish if you live in Miraflores. It'll give you kind of a good intro to the region. Um, if you're a little bit, you want to take a little bit more risks, and budget is a concern, I think Cali, Colombia is actually a great place to go. It's
Yeah.
super cheap. There's a ton of good nature nearby, hiking, rivers, lakes, and it's a great place to learn Spanish. There's a ton of cheap Spanish schools, and it gives you kind of an in of like doing something cultural because it's the salsa dancing capital of the world. So you can go there, take
Have
Spanish
a
lessons,
purpose.
go to bars that have like salsa dancing nights and lessons and learn how to dance salsa, go to the gym, go to jiu-jitsu or boxing, go do some nature stuff on the weekends. It's not the safest city in the world, but if you stay in one of the nice areas and behave yourself to a certain extent, it's a pretty good place to get your feet wet as well.
Yeah, I have a couple things I wanted to ask you. They're a little bit, I guess, like out of order of the flow, but do you think blogging is dead?
No, I don't personally. I think obviously like blogging, traditional blogging, where you write on your own like domain name, is kind of dead because you're not going to get traffic to your blog. Because nowadays, like every travel keyword is going to be owned by Culture Trip, TripAdvisor, and a bunch of like white women bloggers that have been talking about food for 10 years. And so it's going to be really hard to rank and get eyes on your content, to like grow your blog, to make money, to get people on your email list. But on the flip side, the written content is not going away. People have been saying that forever. Like with YouTube taking off and like, oh man, people don't read books anymore. I don't think that's true. I think like written content is here to stay, and I think you can see that with the growth of Twitter lately. So I
That's
think
true.
it's just changed the game a little bit. If you want to be a writer and a travel writer or a blogger, whatever you want to call it, you have to use the modern mediums. You got to use Twitter. You've got to use Substack or some of the Substack alternatives, to really get people to read your stuff, because gone are the days of people finding you in Google, and gone are the days of RSS feeds, and gone are the days of, all that type stuff is just gone. So you got to use the modern mediums of Twitter and Substack if you want people to read you.
And do you really think like there's no future for people like getting a blog and like busting out 1,000 articles?
No, I think there's a future to it, but I think it's gotten a lot harder. Back in the day, you could post an article and you could get a ton of views on it in 3 or 4 months because Google picked it up, because Google actually ranked like indie bloggers and stuff. But nowadays, that's unless you have a big budget to spend on SEO, it's hard to get people to find you in Google. It's just not the same as it was. And so you either have to
Mhm.
like target long tail keywords and grow your site that way, but like you're not gonna, for example, like, is Mexico safe? Like you're not gonna rank for that. You're not gonna rank top three, top five for that in Google, because that's
Mhm.
owned by people that are spending tons of money on that to rank for that. So it's just changed, in my opinion.
And so I see that you're definitely like doing your best to adapt. You got the Substack going. You're now kicking it up with TikTok, and I really like that you are kind of seeming to make it work. Like, what is like the future of the Jake Nomada brand look like?
Um, yeah, I'm trying to get into some other social medias. I've doubled down on what I'm doing on Twitter. I've had such a good experience meeting people on Twitter and connecting with people on Twitter. So I'm doubling down on that. I'm gonna really try to put out the best content I can on my Substack. That really helps guys that are interested in moving to Latin America. And then I'm gonna have a consulting offer, where I will basically like get on calls, do everything for someone that wants to move to Latin America. You know, Airbnbs, hotels, flights, helping them with logistics, with date bars, with nightlife, everything, really try to break things down for people. And so I'm going to have a consulting offer for that. And then I'll be helping people do some residency stuff potentially, but obviously that changes so much. So I'm not sure exactly. I think we've talked about this many a times, like how to structure
Hmm.
that with places like Panama and Paraguay, essentially not becoming options like they once were. Like this stuff changes so rapidly. So I don't know really how to do that yet, but those are kind of the future of what I'm doing.
For sure. Yeah, I was looking and I could only find one other podcast that you did, and it was called like the Documental Podcast with some guy, I think Alejandro in Buenos Aires or something like that. What other podcasts do you have out there if someone was really scraping the internet to find?
Oh, I think I might have been on like something with Dylan Madden one time.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't do many podcasts. This, like I said, this has definitely been the first one in like 2, maybe 3 years. Um, I don't, because I really, if I don't know somebody, I don't really want to do it. So, uh, yeah, I don't think they're going to find much other podcast content from me.
And what's kept you from doing podcasts or doing interviews and sort of reaching out to people that way?
I just never have done it, man. I kind of just am the personality type to just put my head down and do my own thing. And so unless somebody like reaches out to me and really wants to do it, I've never worried about it. I do get hit up for them every once in a while, but I generally just ignore it. Um, but I mean, maybe I should.
And well, we're obviously super happy that you did this one. What made you decide to open up to finally do it? Because I've wanted to do one with you for like 6 months now.
Man, you threw the peer pressure on me. You put me on Twitter. You threw peer pressure on me. I was like, well, fuck. I guess I got to do it now. I mean, I told you I'd do it. I've just been putting it off. So then you peer pressured me into it.
Dude, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, tell everyone where they can find you. Tell them your Twitter, Substack, everywhere else. Where can they find you?
Hey, yeah. First off, thanks for having me, broski. It was fun. Had a good chat with you, as always. And yeah, you can basically just find me on Twitter, Jake Nomada, and then I have a Substack called the Nomada Newsletter, where there's both a free and paid version there, where I put out anywhere from 10 to 20 articles a month about some really unique topics in Latin America, generally geared toward the expat male. So, if that's something you're interested in, definitely check that out.
Yeah, I think I recently said that you're the best American Midwestern writer since Hemingway. And I genuinely believe that. I think you do have a very unique voice, and I really hope that you keep writing.
Hey, I appreciate that, my dude. Truly.